The marketplace was alive with noise, filled with alien voices shouting, laughing, and trading. Bright stalls lined the streets, selling fruit that glowed, cloth that shimmered, and strange weapons that looked more like art than tools of war. In the center of all this life stood a platform made of rusted metal sheets. On that platform was a young alien girl, shivering and small, her wide eyes darting like a trapped animal. Her body was thin, her skin pale, and her clothes little more than torn rags clinging to her. The crowd pressed closer, their eyes full of cruelty, waiting for the next act of entertainment. One of the aliens lifted a heavy bucket filled with scraps of food, broken parts, and wet garbage. He shouted something in his guttural language, and the crowd roared in approval. The girl's lips trembled as she shook her head, whispering, "No, no, please." But her voice was lost under the storm of laughter. The bucket tipped forward, and the garbage poured over her head, covering her shoulders, sliding down her arms and back. Rotten fruit splattered against her, sharp bits of metal scratched her skin, and foul liquids soaked into her clothes until they clung even tighter to her body. The crowd howled with laughter. Some clapped, some pointed, others mimicked her frightened squeals, as if it was the funniest sound in the world. The girl fell to her knees, hands trembling as she tried to brush the filth away. Every movement only made the rags tear more, leaving her more exposed. Her cheeks burned with shame, and her eyes watered, but she did not cry out. She had already learned what happened when she begged. They only laughed harder. A second bucket was brought, even larger. The alien who carried it sneered down at her. She tried to cover herself, but there was nothing she could do. The garbage fell again, heavier this time. Bones, black sludge, half-eaten food, and sharp shards clattered around her, sliding down her hair and sticking to her body. The smell rose thick and foul, making her gag. Her skin itched where the filth touched it, and the cuts stung. Still, the crowd demanded more. Children from the alien families pushed forward, carrying handfuls of scraps to throw at her. They shouted insults, throwing rotten fruit that smacked against her face. The girl raised her arms to shield herself, but the blows came from every side. A piece of broken wood struck her shoulder, and she gasped in pain, curling into a ball on the ground. The crowd roared even louder, stamping their feet, demanding she stand up so they could humiliate her again. She tried to rise, legs shaking, hair dripping with black slime. Her body was trembling from cold and fear, but she stood anyway, knowing if she stayed down, they would beat her. The torn cloth of her dress slipped further, leaving her clutching at her chest with one hand, trying desperately to hide herself. The laughter only grew. Someone shouted that she was worthless, that she was less than dirt, that she was only good for mockery. Another voice answered with a cruel joke, and the crowd broke into another wave of laughter. The girl's ears rang from the noise, her heart pounding as though it might burst. She wanted to run, but there was nowhere to go. The platform was high, surrounded on all sides by eager, mocking faces. She wanted to scream, but her throat locked tight. Shame pressed down heavier than the garbage itself. She had no escape, no hope. And then the crowd grew strangely quiet. It happened so suddenly that she lifted her head in confusion. The mocking shouts faded, the laughter cut off one by one, until only the sound of dripping garbage filled the air. The aliens closest to the platform stepped back, their eyes not on her, but on someone moving through the crowd. He was taller than most of them, his figure sharp and strange. His clothing was different, dark fabric, heavy boots, a jacket patched but strong. His face was human. His eyes burned with anger, cutting through the sea of cruel faces. He walked forward, each step slow but steady, as if nothing in the world could stop him. The aliens muttered, unsure, uneasy. A human was an outsider here, someone beneath notice, yet this one did not bow his head or avert his eyes. He stared only at the girl on the platform. Her breath caught. For the first time, someone was not laughing at her. His gaze was not filled with amusement or cruelty. It was heavy, sharp, like a blade drawn from a sheath. She felt it wrap around her, not crushing her, but shielding her. For one heartbeat, she forgot the garbage, the filth, the shame. She only saw him. The human reached the edge of the platform. A guard stepped forward to block his way, but he pushed past without hesitation, his arm brushing the alien aside as if he were nothing. The girl's knees shook, uncertain if she should fear him too. But then he shrugged off his jacket and placed it around her shoulders. The cloth was warm, smelling faintly of smoke and leather. It covered her trembling body, hiding her from the eyes of the crowd. Gasps rippled through the aliens. Whispers spread quickly. What is he doing? Why is he helping her? Does he not know the punishment? The human ignored them. He crouched down, meeting her eyes, and his voice was low, steady, carrying no mockery. She did not understand his words, but she felt the meaning. You are not alone. The crowd shifted, anger rising as the shock wore off. Voices called for the guards. Others demanded his punishment. Weapons gleamed in the distance as soldiers began to push their way forward, but the human did not move from her side. His arm tightened protectively around her, as if daring anyone to take her again. The girl's chest rose and fell rapidly. She could not believe it was real. No one had ever defended her. No one had ever given her even a shred of dignity. Yet here, in the middle of the filth, this strange human had stepped into her shame and broken it apart. The noise of the crowd grew sharper, the danger rising with every second. The girl clutched his jacket around herself, staring at him with wide, desperate eyes. He looked back at her with steady defiance. For the first time, she felt something stronger than fear. It was small, fragile, but it burned inside her. Hope. The alien crowd erupted in shouts, their voices sharp and angry, no longer laughing. What had been a cruel game was now something else. They did not expect anyone, least of all a human, to interfere. Guards wearing black armor pushed through the mob, their staffs glowing faintly with electric energy. The human tightened his arm around the trembling girl and slowly rose to his feet. His eyes, cold and unyielding, scanned the angry faces surrounding them. He was outnumbered 100 to 1, but his expression carried no fear. The girl shivered beneath his jacket, clutching it tight to her chest. Her voice trembled in a whisper only he could hear. She told him he should leave her, that helping her would only bring him death. Her people never forgave outsiders who broke their traditions. But the human shook his head, his jaw set like stone. He stepped forward, placing himself between her fragile body and the approaching guards. The first guard sneered, raising his staff high. Sparks danced at its tip as he shouted for the human to kneel. The crowd cheered at the demand, eager to see this outsider punished, maybe even executed, for daring to defy them. But the human did not kneel. Instead, he lifted his chin, his glare fixed on the armored alien. He spread his stance, ready to strike if anyone came closer. His presence carried weight, as if he alone was enough to hold back the tide of enemies pressing in. The girl's breath caught. No one had ever stood for her like this. She expected him to falter, to surrender under the pressure of so many enemies. But when the guard lunged forward with his staff, the human moved faster. He grabbed the weapon mid-swing, twisting sharply, and with a sudden strike of his elbow, he drove the guard to his knees. Gasps erupted from the crowd. The human's eyes flashed with fury, and with one push, he sent the guard sprawling into the dust. The other guards advanced at once, weapons raised, their armor clattering as they formed a line. The human shifted his weight, lowering his shoulders like a predator ready to spring. Behind him, the girl's knees buckled, and she dropped back against the wall of the platform, clutching the jacket tighter. She could hardly breathe. Her people were furious now, voices rising in chants for blood. But the human didn't flinch. "Stay behind me." His voice was steady, and though she only understood a little, she knew he was protecting her. The second guard came forward, larger and stronger, his staff glowing brighter than the first. He swung Dung down with brutal strength, aiming to crush the human where he stood. The human dodged to the side, the staff slamming into the ground with a crack of electricity. Dust flew up, the smell of burning filling the air. Before the guard could pull his weapon back, the human drove his fist into the alien's gut, twisting, and sent him stumbling. Another guard tried to grab him from behind, but the human spun, kicking him sharply, sending him crashing into the platform railing. The girl's eyes widened, awe mixing with fear. She had never seen such defiance, never imagined anyone could stand against the guards. Every strike he made was quick, precise, and fueled by unyielding determination. The crowd roared with outrage, throwing curses and demands for his capture. But the human did not stop. He grabbed the girl's hand suddenly, pulling her close. She gasped in shock, stumbling as he tugged her down from the platform. Her bare feet slipped against the stone, but he caught her, steadying her, before dragging her toward a narrow passage between the stalls. The crowd surged forward in chaos. Guards shouted orders, pointing after the fleeing pair. Merchants shoved their goods aside. People screamed and cursed as the human shoved past them, forcing a path through the mess. He moved fast, weaving through the marketplace with the girl clinging to his hand. Her legs were weak, her body still shaking from the shame she endured, but she ran because he did not let go. Behind them, armored footsteps thundered in pursuit. Shouts rose higher, and the crowd split as more soldiers entered the chase. The girl gasped for breath, her lungs burning, her legs barely carrying her weight. She whispered for him to leave her, begged him not to risk everything for her. But his grip only tightened. His eyes stayed forward, sharp and focused, as if her words did not exist. The path narrowed, twisting between stacked crates and cloth tents. Drones rose into the air above, scanning with red lights, searching for them. The human pulled her into shadow, pressing her against a wall while the glowing eyes of the machine swept over the streets. The girl trembled under his arm, her breath shallow. She had never been this close to anyone before, and the warmth of his presence felt strange, comforting but terrifying. When the drones passed, he moved again. His boots pounded against the stone, his jacket still draped over her frail body as they darted through the alleys. Angry voices echoed from every corner, but he did not stop. The marketplace was turning into a trap, and the hunters were closing in fast. Her heart raced wildly. She could not understand why this human risked his life for her. She was nothing in her people's eyes, garbage, a toy for cruelty. Yet this man stood against guards, against a whole crowd for her. She could still feel the strength of his arm when he shielded her, the defiance in his eyes as he faced down soldiers. And though fear gripped her bones, another feeling slowly grew in her chest. Something fragile, something dangerous. For the first time, she wondered if her life might have meaning. The human glanced back at her as they ran, his jaw set, his eyes fierce. In that moment, she saw it clearly. He would not abandon her. Whatever fate awaited them, he had already chosen. And now, so had she. The narrow alleys twisted like a maze, their walls high and cracked, the air thick with the smell of smoke and rot. The human pulled the girl forward, his hand firm around hers, never letting her stumble too far behind. Her breath came in short gasps, her body weak and trembling. Yet she ran because his grip did not allow her to fall. Behind them, the sound of armored boots echoed closer and closer, mixed with the buzzing of drones above. Every corner seemed alive with danger, every shadow a possible trap. The girl glanced over her shoulder and saw the red lights of scanners sweeping through the darkness. She flinched, clutching the jacket tighter around her body. Her people's guards shouted orders, their guttural voices bouncing off the walls, promising punishment not only for her but for the human who dared to steal her away. She whispered through heavy breaths that he should let her go, that they would never stop until she was captured again. But he didn't answer. His eyes stayed sharp, scanning ahead, looking for any path that would lead them away from the hunters. They darted between piles of broken crates, knocking aside sheets of rusted metal that clattered loudly against the ground. The sound carried through the alleys, drawing the guards closer. The girl's heart pounded so hard she thought it would burst. Each echo of boots seemed nearer, each shout harsher. Fear made her stumble, and she nearly fell. But the human pulled her up without slowing, his arm steadying her against his side for a moment before urging her forward again. The drone's lights swept over them suddenly, flashing red against the walls. The girl cried out softly, pulling the jacket up to hide her face, but the human moved fast. He dragged her into the shadow of a collapsed archway, pressing her against the stone as the machine hovered overhead. The light passed over the street, pausing for a breathless moment, then moved away. The girl could feel his chest against her shoulder, his steady heartbeat, so different from her own racing one. She clutched the jacket tighter. Her body pressed small against the wall and dared to lift her eyes toward him. His face was calm, determined, as if fear was something that did not exist for him. The shouting grew louder again. The guards were splitting into groups, blocking the exits of the alley. The human pulled her forward once more, moving faster, his strides long and sure. She stumbled after him, nearly tripping, but his arm caught her each time. They reached a wider path, But this one was more dangerous. Lanterns burned on the walls, and soldiers were stationed at both ends. The human cursed under his breath, pulling her back into shadow. The girl's lips trembled as she whispered that they were trapped, that there was no way out. But he shook his head, his jaw tightening. He waited, eyes sharp, counting the movements of the guards at the far end. Then, suddenly, he acted. Pulling her close, he sprinted across the open path, his boots striking hard against the stone. The soldiers turned in shock, their weapons raised, but the human moved too quickly. He shoved the girl through a narrow doorway between stalls and followed her inside just as bolts of energy crackled past. The shots struck the walls, sparks flying, but the two of them vanished into the darkness of the small storage hall beyond. Inside, the air was stale, heavy with dust and old spices. Crates were stacked high, casting tall shadows in the dim light. The girl clutched at his jacket, her knees shaking as she tried to breathe quietly. He put a finger to his lips, signaling her to stay silent. Outside, the voices of guards thundered, their footsteps pounding as they searched the street. She bit her lip, fighting the urge to sob, her whole body quivering with fear. He crouched by the doorway, his eyes fixed on the faint glow of the soldiers' weapons through the cracks in the wall. Minutes passed like hours. The girl's head spun with fear and exhaustion. She wanted to collapse, but she didn't dare make a sound. The human shifted suddenly, motioning her to follow. He led her deeper into the storage hall, moving quietly between crates, every step measured. At the back, a broken wall opened into another alley. The hole was small, barely enough for her to crawl through. He pushed her forward, urging her to go. She shook her head, whispering that he would not fit, that he would be caught if he tried. His eyes hardened, and he placed his hand firmly on her shoulder. She could feel the strength in his grip, the silent command that she must trust him. With trembling arms, she crawled through the gap, the rough stone scraping her skin. On the other side, the alley was darker, narrower, but free for the moment. She turned back to see him force his body through, his shoulders scraping against the stone, but he pushed on until he emerged beside her. She reached out, helping pull him the last bit, her hands gripping his arm. For the first time, she was the one steadying him, though he hardly needed it. The chase did not stop. As soon as he was free, he pulled her up again, and they moved quickly through the winding passages. Their breaths came hard now, hers sharp and panicked, his low and controlled. The sounds of pursuit echoed always behind them, sometimes distant, sometimes near, but never gone. The girl's mind spun with hopeless thoughts. She whispered again that he should leave her, that his people might forgive him if he gave her up. But he only glanced at her briefly, and in his eyes she saw the answer. He would never let go. Every corner they turned felt like the last. Every step carried the weight of danger. Yet, as she clung to his jacket, something inside her shifted. The shame that had crushed her only hours ago was slowly being replaced by another feeling. This human, this stranger, fought for her, ran for her, risked everything for her. Fear still held her, but beside it grew a fragile spark, a small warmth she did not understand but could not ignore. The alleys stretched endlessly, the night filled with voices of hunters and the buzz of machines. But even in the heart of the chase, as her body trembled and her lungs burned, she realized something. For the first time in her life, she was not running alone. The human pushed open the rusted door of an abandoned storage bay, its hinges screaming as if the sound itself would betray them. Inside, the air was thick with dust, and the faint glow of a broken lantern cast long shadows across the walls. The girl stumbled in first, her legs weak from running, her breath shaking. The human followed quickly, shutting the door behind them with a heavy thud. He pressed his back against it for a moment, listening. Outside, the echoes of guards still filled the alleys, their shouts sharp and angry, the buzz of drones drifting closer. The girl clutched his jacket tightly around herself, pulling it closer as though it were the only shield she had in the world. She leaned against a crate, her knees trembling so badly she could hardly stay standing. The filth from the garbage still clung to her hair and skin, the smell of rot rising around her. Her face burned with shame, remembering the laughter of the crowd, the rotten fruit striking her, the eyes that mocked her. She expected the human to look at her the same way, to see her as something worthless and broken. But when she raised her eyes to him, He was not staring at her with disgust. Instead, he crouched near a barrel, searching for anything useful. His hands moved quickly, tearing a piece of cloth from an old tarp and dipping it into a cracked water container. Then, without a word, he walked back to her and knelt at her side. The girl froze, pressing herself tighter into the crate, confused and afraid. His hand reached out, but not to strike her. Gently, he touched the wet cloth to her arm, wiping away the filth and the cuts that marked her skin. She gasped softly at the unexpected warmth of his touch. Her people had never cared to clean her wounds. They had only deepened them. Her first instinct was to pull away, to shield herself, but she found she could not. The human's eyes were calm, steady, carrying no cruelty. Slowly, carefully, he cleaned her arms, her face, the filth in her hair. Each movement was patient, almost careful, as if she mattered, as if she was more than just an object for shame. Tears stung her eyes, and she turned her face away, whispering that he should not bother. She told him she was nothing, a curse, that saving her would only bring him suffering. But his hand paused only for a moment, then continued, steady and firm. He did not answer with words, yet his silence carried a weight heavier than speech. He was showing her through action what his voice didn't need to say, that she was worth saving. The girl hugged his jacket tighter, her thin shoulders shaking. Her lips trembled as she whispered again that he should leave her behind, that her people would never stop hunting them. Her voice broke as she admitted that she was afraid, more afraid than she had ever been. She expected him to turn away, to finally see her as a burden too heavy to carry. Instead, he looked directly at her, his eyes filled with a fire she did not understand. For the first time, she saw him clearly in the light of the lantern. His face was tired from the chase, dirt smeared on his skin, a small cut bleeding at the corner of his temple. His breathing was heavy, yet his shoulders remained strong, his stance ready. She realized then that he was risking everything for her, a stranger he did not even know. She wanted to ask why, but her voice died in her throat. Outside, the voices of guards grew louder. The heavy steps of armored boots echoed down the street, closer and closer. A drone buzzed past the broken windows, its red light slicing through the cracks in the wall. The girl's heart raced, and she clamped her hand over her mouth to keep from crying out. The human rose silently, moving to the door, pressing his ear against the wood. His jaw tightened. He knew they couldn't stay hidden for long. The girl's breath came in sharp bursts, fear pressing down on her chest. She imagined the door crashing open, guards dragging her out, the crowd laughing once more as she was thrown back onto the platform. Her stomach twisted with terror. She whispered that she didn't want to go back, that she couldn't face it again. Her voice shook, breaking into a sob. The human turned, and before she could shrink away, he knelt again, placing his hand gently on her shoulder. She flinched, expecting harshness, but his grip was steady, grounding her. His voice was low, firm, though she could only understand pieces of his words. Still, she understood his meaning. He would not let them take her. He would not let her fall back into their cruelty. She stared at him through her tears, unable to believe it. No one had ever promised her safety before. No one had ever looked at her like she mattered. Something inside her cracked open, and warmth spread through her chest. She clutched the jacket tighter, pressing her face into the fabric, breathing in the faint scent of smoke and leather that clung to it. The footsteps outside drew nearer. Shouts echoed, calling for the building to be searched. The girl's body stiffened in terror. The human stood, his muscles tense, eyes sharp as steel. He looked around the storage bay quickly, planning their next move. The lantern flickered, casting his shadow long across the wall, a figure standing strong against the storm that pressed in. The girl realized then that she was no longer thinking only of her fear. She was watching him, depending on him, clinging to the fragile thread of hope he carried. She had never felt such trust before, not even a small piece of it. But now it wrapped around her, fragile yet real, holding her up when her legs threatened to collapse. The guards shouted again, their boots striking closer. The girl pressed against the crate, her heart hammering. The human turned back to her, eyes locking with hers. In that silent moment, she knew he would fight for her, even against an army. Her lips trembled, her breath shaking. But for the first time, she whispered something she had never dared before. She whispered, "Thank you." The human gave the faintest nod, then moved toward the back of the storage bay, where another shadowed passage waited. The girl rose on unsteady legs and followed, her fear heavy, but no longer crushing her completely. Because even as the hunters closed in, she knew she was not facing them alone. The news spread like fire through the colony. Whispers turned into shouts, and shouts turned into orders. Every corner of the city was filled with talk of the girl who had been stolen from her punishment and the human who dared to protect her. Large signs appeared quickly on walls, with her face drawn in cruel mockery and his face marked with the word traitor. Rewards were promised to anyone who brought them back, dead or alive. The hunters had grown in number. And now it was not just guards chasing them, but greedy strangers too, men and women hungry for coin. The girl sat on the floor of a small workshop where the human had hidden her for the night. Her arms hugged her knees as she listened to the noise outside. She could hear voices calling his description, voices demanding his capture. Fear pressed heavy in her chest, and she whispered that he should leave her. She told him he could still save himself if he abandoned her now, if he pretended she had escaped on her own. But the human did not answer. He stood at the doorway, his shoulders square, watching the street through a crack in the wall. His silence was like a wall itself, solid, unshaken. When he finally turned, his eyes met hers. For a moment, she thought she saw weariness in them, maybe even sorrow, but behind that was something stronger. He was not going to give her up. He pulled a piece of bread from his bag and handed it to her. She hesitated, her hands trembling, but hunger gnawed at her until she finally took it. The bread was hard and dry, but it was more than she had eaten in days. As she chewed, she realized he was eating nothing. He had given it all to her. Later, when night fell, they slipped out again, moving through darker alleys. But the colony was restless now, alive with the hunt. Merchants closed their stalls early. People gathered in groups, pointing at strangers who passed too quickly. Twice, they had to turn back when they saw patrols waiting at the end of a street. The girl's heart beat like a drum each time. She could feel the weight of eyes watching them, even when no one was near. At one point, they passed close to another group of humans. Workers, dirty and tired, sat near the edge of a broken wall, sharing drinks in silence. The human slowed his steps, as if debating whether to speak to them. But when their eyes met his, he saw the fear there. One of them shook his head quickly, mouthing the words, "Leave us out of this." Another looked away, pretending not to see him at all. The girl understood then. Even his own kind would not help him now. To stand beside her was to invite death, and no one was willing to share that risk. Still, he did not falter. When the guards finally spotted them, shouting, he grabbed her hand and pulled her into another desperate run. They raced through the crooked streets, her bare feet slapping against stone, his boots pounding behind. Bolts of energy whizzed past, cracking against walls, sending sparks across their path. The girl screamed as one struck close, heat burning her skin. He pulled her tighter against him, his arm shielding her as they turned another corner. A door suddenly opened ahead of them, an old alien woman stepping out. For a heartbeat, the girl thought they might find shelter, but the woman's eyes narrowed, and she shouted for the guards instead. The human shoved the girl through another side passage, slamming the door behind them before the woman's cries could bring soldiers. The girl stumbled, panting, shame twisting inside her. Her people wanted her destroyed, and strangers were willing to sell her for money. She was nothing but a curse to everyone she met. But when she looked up, the human's hand was still stretched out to her, urging her to stand. His face was hard, his eyes burning. He wasn't giving up, not even after betrayal, not even when the whole colony turned against them. Her throat tightened, her eyes filling with tears, but she took his hand anyway. They rested for a short time in the shadow of an old bridge, their backs pressed to the cold stone. She whispered again that he should leave her, that she wasn't worth all this pain. She confessed she had been thrown away because she was weak, because she was unwanted. She admitted she had believed it herself for so long. Her words cracked as she said she was nothing. The human turned to her then, his expression sharp. He spoke in his language, slow, firm, his voice heavy with anger, not at her, but at the world that had broken her. She did not understand every word, but the meaning was clear. He was telling her she was not nothing. He was telling her she mattered. He was telling her he would not abandon her, no matter the cost. She stared at him, her chest rising and falling, her lips trembling. His eyes locked on hers with such fire that for a moment she believed him. For the first time in her life, she wondered if she could be more than what her people called her. Their rest did not last. Soon the sound of footsteps echoed again. The hunt was endless, the voices always closing in. The girl's hands shook, her body weak, but she forced herself up when he motioned for her to follow. She wrapped the jacket tighter around her body and walked beside him. The price of his kindness was clear now. He had made himself an enemy of the colony. He had turned strangers into traitors and friends into cowards. He had put his own life on the edge of a blade. But even as the walls closed in and the danger grew, he did not turn back. He chose her again and again, every step of the way. And though fear clawed at her, though shame still whispered inside her heart, she felt something stronger rising against it. A fragile thread of hope tied her to him. The world wanted to tear them apart, but as long as his hand held hers, she would not let go. The ruins stretched like a broken skeleton of the past, walls of crumbling stone and twisted iron rising around them. Smoke drifted through the air, carrying the smell of fire and ash. The human guided the girl into the shadows, his hand tight around hers, his eyes scanning every corner. But it was too late. The hunters had closed in from all sides. Their voices echoed through the ruins, deep and sharp, calling for blood. Lanterns burned in the distance, the glow of energy weapons flashing against the walls. The girl's heart pounded so hard she could not breathe. She clutched his jacket to her body, her bare feet stumbling over the cracked ground. She whispered that they were surrounded, that there was no escape. Her voice shook, breaking into panic. But the human did not stop. His steps were steady, his face unbroken. He pulled her behind a wall of broken machines, his jaw clenched, his eyes sharp with defiance. The first shot came without warning. A bolt of energy smashed against the stone beside them, shattering it into sparks. The girl screamed, covering her head, but the human shoved her down, shielding her with his own body. The second shot followed, brighter and closer, searing the air above them. He rose, grabbing a length of broken pipe from the ground, his only weapon against soldiers armed with glowing rifles. The guards moved in, their armor clattering, their voices rising in cruel triumph. They believed it was over. But when they charged, the human struck first. With a shout, he swung the pipe hard, smashing it against the side of a guard's helmet. The alien stumbled, crashing to the ground. Another guard lunged forward, staff raised, but the human moved quickly, knocking the weapon aside and driving his elbow into the alien's chest. The girl watched in shock, her body trembling. She had never seen anyone fight like this, not with training or strength alone, but with something deeper, something wild. The hunters regrouped, circling them like wolves. Sparks of fire lit the ruins as more bolts rained down. The human darted between the shadows, pulling her with him, forcing the soldiers to follow. Every corner became a battlefield. He slammed one soldier against the wall, using the pipe like a spear, then kicked another back into the flames that licked at the edges of the ruins. Each strike was desperate, fueled not by weapons but by will. He fought as though nothing mattered, but keeping her safe. The girl could hardly breathe as she pressed against the cold stone, watching him fight. He bled now, a line of red cutting down his arm where a bolt had grazed him. His breath came heavy, but he did not fall. When one guard tried to break past him and reach her, the human roared in fury and launched himself forward, tackling the alien to the ground. His fists struck again and again until the guard stopped moving. The girl's chest heaved, her throat tight with tears. No one had ever fought for her. No one had ever placed themselves between her and death. The ruins burned brighter as the hunters set fire to the outer walls, smoke rising into the sky. The girl coughed, choking on the heat. The human pulled her close, wrapping his arm around her as another wave of guards advanced. She clutched at his shirt, whispering that he couldn't fight them all, that he would die for nothing. But he only glanced at her, his eyes fierce, his voice steady. She did not understand every word, but she knew the meaning. He was telling her that her life was not nothing. He was telling her he would die before he let them take her. The soldiers closed in. Their shadows stretched long in the firelight, weapons gleaming. The human stood tall, his pipe raised, his body battered but unyielding. The girl's tears fell fast, her lips trembling. She wanted to scream at him to run, to save himself, but the words would not come. She could only watch as he faced them alone. Then something inside her broke open. She could no longer stay silent, no longer hide behind fear. Her people had called her worthless, had thrown her into shame, but this human had given her something she had never known before. He had given her dignity, hope, and a reason to stand. And now, as he bled for her, she felt a strength rising in her chest. The guards charged together, their voices sharp, their weapons glowing. The human swung his pipe, striking one across the helmet, but another slashed at his side, and he stumbled. The girl cried out, her body moving before her mind could stop it. She stepped forward, no longer hiding, no longer clinging to the shadows. Her hands shook, but her eyes blazed. She shouted in her own tongue, her voice cracking through the fire and chaos. For the first time, she was not begging. She was defying. The soldiers hesitated, surprised by her sudden cry. The human rose again, seizing the moment, striking at the nearest guard with a fury that sent him reeling back. The girl's chest heaved, her voice rising louder, echoing through the ruins. She screamed that she would not go back, that she would not be broken again. The sound shocked even herself, her body trembling with the power of it. The human fought harder, his strikes sharper, his strength renewed by her voice. He pushed the soldiers back step by step, refusing to fall. The girl, though unarmed, stepped beside him, her head held high. For the first time in her life, she was not a victim crouching in shame. She was standing, facing the hunters with the human at her side. The battle raged in fire and smoke, the ruins alive with noise and fury. The girl's tears dried on her cheeks as she screamed again, her voice carrying into the night. The soldiers faltered, shaken by the fire in her eyes and the strength of the human who would not surrender. And in that moment, as the ruins burned around them, she realized she was no longer the same broken creature who had been mocked on the platform. Something new had risen inside her, and it burned brighter than the flames. She was not alone. She was not worthless. She had found her strength, and she would fight to keep it. The night was alive with smoke and fire, the ruins glowing red as the last of the hunters closed in. The human stood in front of the girl, his body cut and bruised, his chest rising and falling like a storm. His pipe was bent now, cracked from too many blows, but he still held it tightly, refusing to drop it. The girl stood behind him, her eyes no longer full of only fear. Something inside her had changed. The shame and silence that once chained her were gone. Her hands clenched at his jacket, and she raised her chin, her voice steady for the first time. The guards laughed at first, thinking she was too weak, too broken to matter. They mocked her words, shouting that she was still nothing, still the same creature they had thrown garbage on. But she did not lower her head. She stepped forward, standing shoulder to shoulder with the human. The firelight burned in her eyes, and for the first time, she felt taller than all of them. The human looked at her, his expression sharp but proud. He gave a small nod, as if telling her this moment was hers to claim. She felt his strength beside her, and it poured into her veins like fire. She raised her hands, trembling but certain, and something inside her stirred. She had always hidden it, this strange gift that her people despised. But now she let it rise. Light flickered at her fingertips, faint at first, then brighter, until sparks danced like tiny stars. The crowd of guards froze, their sneers turning into uneasy stares. The girl closed her eyes, breathing deep, and when she opened them again, her voice thundered through the ruins. She shouted that she was not their slave, not their shame, not their toy. She belonged to herself. The sparks grew into a glow, wrapping her hands, spilling out into the air. The soldiers stumbled back, fear creeping into their eyes. The girl stretched her arms, and the light burst outward, striking the ground in a wave. Dust and stone lifted into the air, the fire bending with the force of her will. The ruins shook, and the soldiers fell back in panic, shouting for retreat. The human shielded his face from the burst, his jacket whipping in the wind. But when the glow settled, he lowered his arm and stared at her. She was standing tall, her thin frame glowing with power, her hair whipping in the hot wind. She looked nothing like the broken girl he had found on that platform. She looked like someone reborn. The soldiers turned to flee, their voices sharp with fear. They had not expected this. They had thought her powerless, a worthless creature to be mocked and beaten. Now they saw her for what she was: dangerous, strong, untamed. They stumbled over each other to escape, their armor clattering as they vanished into the smoke. The girl dropped to her knees, her body shaking, the glow fading from her hands. She gasped for breath, her strength nearly gone. The human was at her side instantly, pulling her against him, his arm steadying her trembling body. She looked up at him through her tears, afraid he might see her as monstrous now. But his eyes held only respect, only pride. She whispered in her language, asking why he had done this for her, why he had fought, bled, and risked everything. She told him she had been nothing, worthless in her people's eyes. She asked why he hadn't left her like everyone else. The human did not speak at first. He only touched her shoulder, firm and steady, his gaze never breaking from hers. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, but each word was heavy with truth. He told her she was not nothing. He told her she had always been worth saving. Her chest ached with something she could not name. Tears spilled down her cheeks, but they were not only from sorrow. They were from something brighter, something fragile and warm. She clutched his jacket tighter, burying her face against it. For the first time in her life, she felt safe. Not because the danger was gone, it still burned in the distance, but because she knew she was no longer alone. The fires around them began to fade as the night wind carried the smoke away. The ruins were silent now, empty of hunters, filled only with the crackle of dying flames. The girl lifted her head slowly, her body still trembling, and looked out at the world beyond the walls. It was wide, dangerous, full of enemies who would never forgive her for escaping. But beside her stood someone who had fought the entire world for her. Someone who had seen her not as trash, but as a life worth fighting for. She rose shakily to her feet, the human's hand steadying her. Her bare feet touched the cold ground, but she no longer felt so weak. She stood straighter, her head higher, the jacket wrapped around her like armor. The human glanced at her, his jaw set, his eyes sharp. She met his gaze and nodded. They did not need words. The promise was already there. Together, they walked away from the burning ruins. Step by step, they moved into the unknown, leaving behind the shame, the cruelty, and the laughter that once broke her spirit. The girl no longer felt the weight of garbage on her skin, no longer felt the sting of mocking eyes. What she carried now was something new, hope, fierce, and alive. Her people had tried to destroy her. They had tried to bury her in filth and shame. But with the human's hand pulling her from the darkness, she had risen instead. She was no longer the girl on the platform. She was someone new, someone strong. And as the dawn's first light touched the horizon, she knew her story was only beginning.